Well, hello there, and welcome to today's webinar on interviewing how to get the job offer. We welcome you. My name is Brian Allen. I am a senior consultant with Career Management Partners, and it'll be my pleasure to be your guide for the next hour as we explore this perhaps is the most critical step in any successful job search. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, where you are able to sell yourself in person, perhaps on the phone, more likely in person, to someone who is wanting to consider hiring you. And it is your job during the interview to make them decide that you're the one that they want to hire so that you can then get the job offer. That's how this works. So the interview process is full of wonderful opportunities, but also full of strife and anxiety and pitfalls that could hurt your chances or eliminate your chances of getting the job you want. So we're glad that you're with us today. I am hopefully you've listened to some of our other webinars, and you'll be attending some of the webinar sessions that we will have available for you, because we cover many other areas. This particular webinar cannot go into great detail about all of the intricacies involving a successful interview, but we will hit on the top issues, and I think you'll walk away from this session much more prepared to be prepared to succeed in an interview. And that is our goal, to help you be ready to put your best foot forward during an interview. Here's the agenda we'll follow today. We'll talk about the cycle. There's essentially 3 phases to any kind of an interview process. We will discuss various kinds of interviews that you might encounter. We will then speak about one of the best things that you can do to prepare ahead of time is to remember success stories that you have already lived in your past professional life and be able to relate those success stories as answers to interview questions for your next job. And so we'll talk a lot about success stories throughout the program. We also are going to touch on a good number of very typical, commonly asked questions that almost every interview will have at least one of, and how to approach those and what's behind the question that the interviewer is asking. And then we'll also talk about what you can do to follow up once the actual interview itself is completed in order to ensure or to increase your chances of being the one that they hire. And we will recap our key points that that we will cover. We'll recap those towards the end, and that will be the end of our webinar. So let's get started with the interview cycle. Now, what we mean by this is there's 3 phases to any interview process, phases that you will find yourself in. The first phase is how you are preparing yourself for the interview that maybe you already have scheduled, but at least that you're anticipating that you will schedule sometime in the future. What you do in order to prepare yourselves for that interview can have a great deal of impact as to how successful that interview will be. The second phase, of course, is the interview itself. This is the time when you are either in front of or on the phone with or maybe on video chat with someone, and they're looking and listening at you, and you're presenting your case to them. Now that can be multiple times. There can be multiple events that make up that particular phase, because you might have a screening interview on the phone with someone. You may have a video chat with someone. You may then get invited in to come into and visit in person with some of the hiring managers or the decision makers or the team that you'll be a part of. Then there may be a final meeting in person with the head person. There could be a variety of meetings or events that happen during this second phase of the interview itself. But once the interview is over, it's not really over, because there are things that you can do to follow up to ensure or to increase your chances of success. Not necessarily things that can overcome a bad interview itself. However, that has happened where the follow-up can rectify a mistake or a glitch that maybe happened during the interview. But so these are the 3 phases of an interview. And we're going to kind of look at each one of them in a little bit of detail. So what kinds of things can you do to prepare yourself for an interview? Well, first thing is to carefully read that job description for whatever the job is, and so that you can understand to some degree what it is they're looking for, and we refer to these as keywords. Now, you will not find in any job, well, I shouldn't say that. I saw one the other day that had a section of keywords. That's kind of rare. But your goal is to look and understand and read that job description thoroughly enough to where you get a sense of what it is that they're most interested in the candidate that they want to hire. What qualities, what skills, what experiences, what background, what certifications, what is it that they really are looking for in the candidate that they want to hire? Now, unfortunately, that might be camouflaged or buried somewhere within that job description. So the words carefully is put at the beginning of this bullet point for a reason. You cannot just glance at or get a quick understanding by looking over the job description. You must carefully read it and inhale it, so to speak, so that you really do recognize what it is that they're looking for, and try to identify some of the key issues or the key words that they're going to be potentially asking questions about during the interview. And for each of those issues that you can identify, those key issues that you can identify, think back to your memory to a time when you successfully handled or demonstrated whatever the situation was or whatever the quality that they're going to be looking for. And remember in as much detail as you can that particular specific situation. And we are going to share with you how you can create a success story. And that's a success story is something from your past that has actually happened that can be used as the answer to many questions that you'll get during an interview. And we're going to introduce you to what we call the STAR method. That's a little formula or a recipe, if you will, for how to put together your answer in the form of a success story, so that related to these key issues, so that if you do this enough times prior to the interview, you'll have your answers ready, so to speak. Not perhaps for every question, because it's impossible to anticipate every question that will be asked, but you'll have a pretty good head start if you can identify the things in the job description and remember when you've demonstrated those successfully in the past and have a story to demonstrate or to share that demonstration in your interview. Then you want not just to have them in your head, you actually want to prepare them and practice them. And also prepare to answer some of the more general questions that we're going to also introduce to you. You also will need to find and make a list of questions that you will be wanting to ask of the interviewer while it is your turn, because every interview most likely will give an opportunity for you to ask questions of them. And having a good set of questions is a very important part of a successful interview. So be preparing and looking for things to ask about when you are in the interview. And this could be a long list. You may not want to ask them all, but you do probably want to compile a pretty good long list of questions about something you're interested in or something you'd like to know more about related to the job itself. So you need to do some research on the company and to do some research as much as possible on the specific job itself. You will need to know about the company and their basic products and services, their growth, their future goals, things like that, which you can get a sense of if you take some time and do research on their company website and other sites where you can do research on organizations. But you want to know about that particular company as much as you can. Now, you can't know enough about the company as you would if you worked there. So it could be another a technique for your research is to reach out to someone in your network, possibly, who is currently or has been previously employed by the company that you're going to be interviewing with. That could be something that may be easier to do than you may realize, especially if you're involved in LinkedIn, for example, and have some social networking skills. We have webinars on those things, by the way. So this is all things that you can do to prepare. Now, a pro tip here, use the mock interview tool that you'll find on Career Workspace to record yourself on video answering practice interview questions, because that would only work, of course, if your computer is equipped with a video camera, but very often modern modern laptops have cameras embedded in them, so you can use that tool. But the interview is a complex interaction. It's not just the words you use to answer the question. Those are important. It's not just the sound you make while you're answering those questions. That's important as also. But it's also how you look and what they see, not your facial expression, your hand gestures, all those sorts of things that complete the message that you're making with your interview. So if you can practice an interview by recording yourself and then letting yourself see how you look and as well as what you sound like, and perhaps sharing that video recording with someone who might be able to give you some feedback and coach you through some more successful techniques in an interview, that can be a great thing for you. And that's available for you in our Career Workspace web portal. Now, every interviewer has got a set of questions in mind that they're going to ask that are related specifically to the key skills that they're looking for in the ideal candidate for any position. Unfortunately, they won't share those questions with you until the interview begins. But like I said before, you can anticipate by reading carefully the job description. But over and above the questions they want to ask for a specific job, every interviewer will have 3 overriding questions that they'll be curious about and want to have answered from any candidate that they're interviewing. And so it's important that you be aware of these questions so that you can also have those in mind and attempt to answer them as well. Even though you may not have an exact question, they will have these thoughts in their head. They will want to know about any candidate. Can this person do the job that we need to hire them for? Do they have this basic skills and qualifications? So that's maybe the first question that's in their mind, and that's one that drives many of the specific questions that you will hear during the interview. The second overriding question they have, though, is they want to know if you really do want to work for this particular job, if this job is interesting to you. And that could be answered by how prepared you are. That could be answered by how much you've discovered about the specific job. And that could also be answered by the way you present yourself during the interview. So you can show them you really want this job. Now, unfortunately, if we're not careful, we may communicate that we just want a job, not necessarily this job. And that's something the interviewer is going to be looking out for. The third overriding question, however, and this is one that if they don't get good answers to the first 2, they're not even going to bother trying to find an answer to this last one. However, if they think you do have the skills and they think that you do want to do this job, they then will want to know, will you fit in with our group if we were to hire you? Will you be a good fit for our organization, for our team? Will you become one of us? So these are overriding questions that you won't actually get specific questions posed to you, but these are going to be in the mind of the interviewer. So keep those in mind, and as you're preparing, make sure you show that you can do the job with the stories, because they have to relate to what this particular job is, but also show that you want to work for this company and that you will fit in, that you'll do whatever it takes, you'll be adaptable to whatever they need you to do, because it's not just a job to you, it is the job that you're wanting. Now, you may find that there are a variety of different kinds of interviews, and you may approach each of those a little differently in the way that you prepare for them. The most common interview is an individual, and that can be in person or on the phone, where you're actually communicating maybe one-on-one, maybe 2 or 3 people are interviewing at the same time, however, but that's the most common type. But there are other kinds of interviews. There's a digital interview where the computer is involved. And it could be where you're having a video interview with someone and it's live and in the moment, and they're looking and asking you questions and hearing and seeing your responses, and you are listening and hearing them as well and seeing them as well. There are a number of tools that can allow you to do that. Skype is very, very common. FaceTime, HireVue, Spark Hire. There's a number of different platforms that can be utilized between 2 people who have computers with camera attachments and Wi-Fi connections. There's also a panel interview, and this is where multiple people are conducting the interview. Maybe one is taking the lead and asking most of the questions, but there's other people also asking and looking at you and evaluating your answers. So a panel interview is a little more tricky because you have to make sure you give as quality attention to everyone. Obviously, most of your eye contact and your responses are going to be delivered back to whoever's asking the question, but you really cannot ignore the other people sitting behind the table or on the panel during your interview answers. You need to make sure you give them some eye contact and facial expressions as well. And then there's something that's kind of come up that's quite interesting. It's called a case interview. And this is not real common. However, in certain kinds of jobs or in certain kinds of businesses, they are more and more common. A panel interview is when you're not asked a regular kind of interview question, but you may be given a business scenario, a challenge. What would you do in this situation? And the point of asking a question like that, and these are going to be complex kind of questions that are going to be really, not have a simple answer to them. That's going to give you an opportunity to demonstrate your thought process, demonstrate your how you would deal with a problem, and give you a little time in order to formulate what you would do about a specific situation. Now, I can't tell you all kinds of examples, but one that does come to mind is someone might ask you, how many basketballs would fit into this room we're sitting in right now? Now, that's a very odd question, but that is an example of a kind of question that would draw upon your analytical abilities, your strategy, your research, and these are what they're wanting to see demonstrated, and that's why they would pose a question such as that. These are called case interviews, or you're given a business case of some sort. It could be a silly one like the one I mentioned, or it could be more realistic one like, you're in charge of opening up a new division in a new state with lots of competition. What would you do first? Something like that, a business case that you have to then answer with what you would do and give your analytical responses to it. Now, those are rare, but most often you're going to get an individual interview. Digital interviews are more and more common, especially with the technology that's at our fingertips with laptops and cell phones and tablets and desktop computers. We can communicate digitally very easily. Panel interviews are very common. Case interviews are not very common. They're kind of rare, but we wanted to let you know about those. Now, we do have another webinar called Advanced Interviewing Strategies that goes into a little bit more detail, a little bit more examples and preparation for some of the more advanced, the panel and the interview, the case interview type situations. So if you find yourself anticipating that you'll have one of those or you would like to prepare for those, you may want to look for and attend the Advanced Interviewing Strategies webinar. So those are the first two stages. But the third stage, an interview is not really over when you shut down the phone or click off the video or stand up and shake hands and walk out of the room. The interview is not really over. That second phase is, but the rest of the interview still is intact. And so the follow-up is the third phase of any kind of an interview situation. And really the follow-up can be where you can solidify a good interview or repair perhaps a slightly damaged interview by how you handle yourself after the interview is over. So there's a couple of things we want to suggest. First of all, thank whoever it is that you interviewed with. You can send an email. You could also write a card on some sort of a note, put it in the mail, but somehow respond back in a short time after the interview is over, appreciating the time that they spent with you. That reinforces your professionalism in their eyes. That reminds them about who you are again, because they may have, in the past 2 days since the interview happened, they may have talked to another 10 or 20 people about the same position, and it's not at all unusual for you to get lost in the flood of other candidates. You also need to know what your next steps should be. When are they going to make a decision? Do I need to send you a list of my references? Do I need to talk to someone about a background screen or a drug test? What is the next step? When do you anticipate making a decision? These are things you need to know before you walk out of that interview. Now, again, we have another webinar that goes into more detail about this third phase. It's called Following Up After the Interview. And again, the purpose of this webinar is simply to kind of lay these things out, but we can go more detail in some of the follow-up interviews. So Following Up After the Interview is another webinar that you may want to consider taking. Okay, now, any interview is a combination of visual and vocal communication. And the interviewer is going to be making a judgment about your capability. They're going to have these three questions I mentioned. Can he do the job? Does he want to do this job? And will he fit in with us? And they're judging you as they're listening, but they're also looking at you. So You have to make a human connection, and it involves the eye and the ear, or in this case, your lips. So be prepared to sell yourself and to state your case well in a number of different ways, not just in the way you answer the question. So here's some other things to consider. Make sure you arrive early. It's a kiss of death to be late to an interview. Smile upon meeting them. And again, that's something that seems natural, but many people forget how to smile when they're nervous or when they're anxious. Or perhaps smiling is just not something that's natural for you. However, a smile is one of the most powerful things that you can use to help create a good relationship during the interview with whoever it is that you're going to be interviewing with. So smile first and smile often. A good handshake. If you do have to reach out and have a handshake with someone, it should communicate. And believe it or not, touching someone does communicate. It communicates your confidence. It communicates your enthusiasm for being there. It communicates your feeling about yourself. It's amazing how much communication happens with a handshake. So practice your handshake with someone. And if you don't handshake very well, you need to practice that in order to be better at it, because not smiling and a poor handshake digs a hole at the early stages of the interview that you may have difficulty climbing out of throughout the rest of the interview. Make sure you're speaking clearly. Some of us mumble, some of us talk too fast. You need to listen to yourself, and you perhaps even need to get someone to give you some feedback, and that's one of the things your coach or your consultant can help you with. But you need to be aware of what your speaking voice is. You need to be able to sit upright. You don't have to be ramrod straight, but you also do not want to lean or slouch at any time. You need to have good eye contact throughout the interview. That does not mean that you have a staring contest with someone, but it does mean that most of the time when you're listening and talking to someone, you're looking at their face, not at your hands, not at the table, not out the window, not up at the ceiling. You may not be aware of how easy it is that your eyes can drift to another place. Especially many of us look up whenever we're thinking about something. When you're thinking about how to answer a question, very often your eyes go up. It won't ruin anything if you do that now and again. However, the point is, make sure that most of the time your eye is on the person. Now, another tip here, if you are on a video interview, looking someone in the eye is possible. The way to do that is not to look at your screen, but to look into the camera that is recording you. Because looking into the camera is the equivalent of looking at the other person's eyes when you're on a video connection. So good eye contact. We recommend that you put your cell phone away, or you do not even carry your cell phone into the interview if you're doing an interview on site or in person, because there's really nothing good that your cell can do for you during the interview. There are a lot of things that it can do to distract you or interrupt or make a bad impression. Even if you have to wait for a few moments before the interview begins in some sort of a business waiting area, use that time to listen and look and absorb the environment that you're in. What does it sound like to work there? I mean, this may be the office or something related to the office that you're going to be working in one day. What do people look like? Are they happy with their jobs? What's the dress code? What is is this new furniture or old furniture? Is the company successful or is it barely squeaking? There are all kinds of great clues that you can get about the reality of working in that place if you take your head out of your phone and look and listen. You may also be able to engage the receptionist, whoever may be the attendant who is introducing you to the interviewer. You may have a nice conversation with them. Believe it, a lot of big companies train their administrative people or their receptionists to be a vital part of the interview process, to see what is this person like before the interview began and after it was over. Were they calm? Were they nervous? Were they engaged? Were they talking to other people? Did they seem calm? That happens. So make sure that you're able to communicate with and learn from the environment that you're going to be in before the interview happens. And again, if you have your cell phone with you, chances are you're going to be focused on that cell phone rather than the valuable information that's swirling around you. So again, we suggest no cell phones. You need to look your best. You don't have to go out and buy a brand new pair of clothes, but make sure whatever you do wear fits well, is well cleaned and groomed, and that you look your best. See to your hair and your gentlemen, your shave and your nails. Ladies, your makeup and your everything else. I mean, this is a chance to make a good impression, and your attire is a very important part of that. And then don't overlook the importance of that final handshake, because again, if it's weak, it can kind of counteract any of the other things you may have said about yourself. So all of these things are important, and many of these things have nothing to do with actually what you're saying. You never get a second chance to make a good first impression. And so an interview very often is that opportunity to make that good first impression. So approach it appropriately. Now, how you answer, we're going to go over some specifics here in a moment, but any interviewer is going to be interested in those three overriding questions that I mentioned, as well as the specifics about the questions they have planned for determining whether you're qualified to do this particular job. But any professional organization is also going to be interested in a number of key business skills or qualities. And if you can blend in these qualities and how you have demonstrated in them in the past, you're going to be helping yourself. Things about your ability to think critically about a business situation, or take initiative rather than wait to be told what to do. Adapt to change, because that's a constant in our world. How you are a professionalism and how you carry yourself and how you have carried yourself. How you were able to play well with others, or to collaborate or be a member of a team. How you can use sound judgment and how you have used sound judgment in the past. And just an overall attitude of positivity and optimism. All of these things are going to make you look better and make you more attractive to any kind of an interview situation. So these are all things that you can do to prepare to get yourself straight in order to be ready for putting your best foot forward during an interview. The best way, we think, however, of preparing for a successful interview is for you to create and prepare and practice and be confident delivering a series of success stories from your past. And so these success stories, now let me reiterate, these are true. These are not something you've made up. This is not fiction. This is something that's actually happened to you, that is relevant to some of the qualities that this particular job requires. And it is something that you can remember from your past. So success stories could be your best preparation for a successful interview. And these are all things that you'll do in advance of the interview itself. Now, we are introducing you to the STAR method, and this is a technique that helps you to craft an answer. You can craft some of your answers ahead of time and have them ready. However, you can't prepare for every question, so sometimes you may have to come up with an answer spur of the moment when the interviewer has asked you a question. This STAR method is going to be a little formula that you can keep in your mind and follow in order to help you in spur of the moment create hopefully a good success story that perhaps if you had not had developed it already. What is the STAR method? Well, the STAR method is a way of answering a question that is based upon the reality that interviewers understand, and that is that your past performance is the best predictor of your future behavior. And interviewers understand that, and as a result, they will not every question you will hear will be about your past performance, but a good number of them, if not the majority of the questions you will get during interviews, will be about your past performance. And of course, they're looking for a demonstration of when you have done what they're looking to hire you to do, when you've done it before. Your success stories can convince the interviewers that you're the one to do the job, and frankly, they're looking for the one. They don't want to continue to hire people or interview people. They want to interview them. So here's the STAR method. The letters STAR stand for situation, task, action, result. And that is the order in which you should craft your story. You should begin by describing briefly what the situation was or what the task was related to this story that you're about to tell. And don't go into too much detail. This is a common mistake a lot of people make, is that you just go on and on and on about every little detail that really does not do a good job of selling you. It sells the situation, but that's not what's being interviewed. you're the one that they're interested in. So don't take too much time. Maybe 10 to 15% of the time you're going to answer your question should be devoted to setting up the situation or describing the task. The most important part of your answer, therefore, the most time in your answer should be devoted to the A. What action did you take? What did you do? What did you think when you saw the situation? What was your reaction? Who did you ask questions of? What did you do to research? What did you try that worked? What did you try that failed? How did you overcome hurdles? How did you convince others to help? You've got to make sure you tell about what you did, because they're interviewing you and they want to know what you did in order to compare whether you can do it for them or not. So the vast majority of the time you take in a story, we suggest 65 to 75, but again, that's just a guideline. It doesn't have to be exact. But it should be devoted to you talking about what you did around that situation, demonstrating, hopefully successfully, some of the qualities that they're wanting to find in the candidate that they want to hire. So you tell about the time you did it, but make sure you bring yourself into that story. Now, the reason I'm stressing this is that my experience as a coach over the past couple of decades has proven to me that many of us are guilty of too much modesty during a job search time, especially during an interview. We are not comfortable, many of us are not comfortable talking about ourselves. We don't want to be seen as bragging or boasting about what we did, and therefore we might shortcut or overlook completely opportunities for us to convince the employer that we're the one that they need to hire. So I don't want you to do this. So make sure that as you're preparing your success stories, you focus on what action you took. Then the letter R is the result. What happened? So what? I mean, every story needs to have an ending, right? You don't want to leave people hanging, but you don't want to take up a lot of time. But you do want to explain what the impact was, or what the reward was, or your satisfaction, or the letter that the customer wrote, or whatever the outcome was. It needs to have and it should be positive, hopefully, but it needs to have an ending. You need to have a beginning, middle, and end to any of your stories. And so remember the STAR method. Now, I can't give you examples of which, but let me go in a little bit more detail. A success story is what we call anything that demonstrates dynamically the strengths that you have demonstrated in the past that relate to what qualities the employer is looking for the job in the future. How many? There's no way to anticipate. I would suggest if you go into an interview and you don't have from 5 to 10 good success stories related to things that you've discovered in the job posting, you may not have done enough preparation. And again, you may have to come up with a success story that you had not prepared for when you hear a question that maybe is out of the blue or that was unanticipated. But again, you can remember that STAR formula and help you to craft that story on the fly. Where can you find these stories? Well, they're from your past. Again, this is not fiction, so you may have to remember. But a lot of times we forget what we've done on the job, or we forget our successes, and we may need some prompting. So looking at your previous resumes might help you to identify, what it is you're saying on your resume that you would consider an accomplishment. And if you've attended our webinar on resumes or have discussed with your consultant the successful creating of a resume, it's got to be around success stories that you have had, or accomplishment statements is what we refer to them in the webinar for resumes. Your resume needs to have accomplishment statements. Well, an interview is an opportunity for you to take a accomplishment statement out of your resume and create a success story that embellishes it and gives you have more time. By the way, I should have mentioned, how much time should you take to answer a question? Well, there's no hard and fast rule, but we recommend a good success story utilizing the STAR formula should be around 2 minutes. More than that, you may be, rambling and going overboard. Less than 2 minutes, you may not be giving yourself a good enough sales presentation. So roughly 2 minutes. So again, your resume has these accomplishment statements. Your interview preparation can expand upon those to create a success stories. Now, the questions that success stories and the STAR method are appropriate for are what are referred to in the trade as behavioral questions. And this is a whole philosophy of how to do interview questions. We'll talk more about those in a minute. Those will not be the only questions you will hear, however, but again, as I said, there's a good majority of them will be. So here's some special tips about these success stories. Write them down, especially at the beginning. Now, be careful. Don't rely upon them. Don't try to take in your question and your story, I should say, written down and take it into the interview and read it. I did that. Sorry, I didn't, but one of my clients early on in my career did that in an interview. She and I had prepared for her interview, and she wrote notes about her success stories. Well, then she took those notes into the interview and read from them during the actual interview. That made a very bad impression, and unfortunately, one of the people on the interview panel was a colleague of mine, and she came later on to me and said, "Did you suggest that lady read her answers?" And I said, "No, I never thought not to tell her to do it, however, because I kind of think that was common sense." Well, don't read your answers. However, write them down so that you can be able to see them and then edit them and polish them as you're preparing for your interviews. Practice then answering that question until it feels natural. And it may be that you need to do it in front of the bathroom mirror. You may need to practice in front of your pets or your family members or stuffed animals or whatever. You need to practice saying it and timing yourself, by the way. The best way to practice it, however, is on video camera. And so if you have access to a video camera, and of course if you have a smartphone, almost every phone has some sort of a video capability built in. You have it on your laptops or your computer perhaps. It is a tool that is embedded into the Career Workspace web portal that you have when you are a client of Career Management Partners. Recording yourself on video is a wonderful way to improve your presentation. Yeah, it's going to make you feel a little odd at first. That's true. Seeing and hearing ourselves on video is not a common thing. But get over that uncomfortableness. It's a marvelous learning tool. Role play with your consultant or a friend if you don't have a consultant to work with, where they pretend to be the interviewer and ask you some questions related to the job posting that you're preparing for, and then you answer the questions, and then you discuss how it sounded and how it felt to give those answers. So you can do that role play. But it's important to get feedback before, feedback on how well you answered and what you could do to answer more effectively before you go into the interview itself, because that's not the time for feedback. That's the time for you to demonstrate with confidence and skill how you can answer these questions. So this is all about the preparation. Now let's get into some of these questions. Again, behavioral questions are going to be what you're going to hear a lot of, and the way to answer a behavioral question is to provide a relevant success story from your past. And again, that's just why they're called behavioral questions. Here's some examples of what you'll hear that is referred to as a behavioral question. Tell me about a project or task you were proud of in your last position. Now, the clue that this is a behavioral question is the first three words. Tell me about. That is your clue that this is a question that can be answered with the story from my past. You'll hear lots of those. You may not always hear tell me about. You may hear give me an example of your creativity. Or you may hear describe a situation where you were frustrated with a coworker. What did you do? Or where you saved the day. Describe a situation. Again, that's the clue. Tell me about a time you overlooked an important detail. How have you demonstrated teamwork in a previous role? Describe a time you went above and beyond. Each of these is an invitation for you to tell a story from your past. That's what a behavioral question is, and they are effective. Interviewers used to ask, what would you do in this situation questions, and they still do sometimes. But what interviewers found is a lot of people can come up with a great answer to a what would you do, but it had nothing at all to do with what they actually were able to or did do when they were ultimately hired. And so that kind of question has lost favor in the minds of interviewers these days. Instead, they're finding much more success asking these behavioral questions, because if you can tell about when you did it in the past, chances are good that you'll be able to do it for them in the future. So that's what behavioral questions are about. And again, you answer a behavioral question with a star success story that relates to the issue or the topic that that question was addressing. Now, again, these are not the only questions you'll hear, but you'll hear plenty of them. You will also hear a set of basic kinds of questions, and there's no way to come up with a list of a complete list of all the questions that you may hear besides the behavioral questions. But we have created a pretty good list of questions that you can probably anticipate hearing, if not in every interview, at least once if you go through a number of interviews. So what we're going to do, we're not going to tell you what to say. We cannot give you the words to answer each of these questions. You can anticipate these questions and have an answer ready, but it's got to be your answer. I can't tell you what words to use. Now, you may find if you go to a bookstore or a library, there are, self-help section or the career section, there are lots of books that people have written that will give you specific words to say. I kind of caution you to not rely too much on someone else's words. That can be dangerous in an interview because the interviewers are probably skilled at picking out whether you're telling the truth, whether you're being genuine, or whether you're regurgitating something else that somebody else did. That's probably going to be dangerous for you. However, if you are just baffled by what to say and how to say it, and you need some examples to help get you over the hump, maybe some of those books might be helpful. Maybe some of the tips we're going to have in our library of the career workspace about interviewing tips might help you. But and your consultant certainly will be someone who can help you prepare for your interview. But don't rely upon anybody else to answer the question for you. You've got to come up with your own answer. So now, saying that, what I'm going to do for each of these 8 questions, I'm going to kind of let you know what's kind of behind the question and some thoughts about how to respond to each of these. So tell me about yourself. Very, very common. It's an icebreaker question. What the interviewer is looking for is just an overview of your experience, but also they want to give, kind of determine how well you can communicate with them. So now the way to answer this question is what we refer to as your elevator speech, or perhaps it's also called your 30-second commercial. And this is something you can anticipate and prepare for ahead of time and practice with your friend or with your consultant. It should relate to what they want you to do. So don't go into details about where you were born and what your favorite Disney character was when you were a child and all those irrelevant things. It needs to be related to who you are as a professional now and what you are able to do for them. And so if you can blend in some success story related to something that is going to be relevant to the job you're interviewing for, that could be a good way to respond. But that question is something you'll probably hear, so have an answer ready. They also are going to want to find out what's most important in your background to them. So they're your audience. You need to be able to answer to your audience needs. So have a response based maybe on the profile that's at the top of your resume. Address why you can do the job and why you want the job. Remember, those are 2 of the questions that they're going to have overriding in their mind anyway. So this is an opportunity to address those things, is how you answer the tell me about yourself question. Another question, very common, what are your strengths? The interviewer is looking to see how self-aware you may be, what you consider to be your strong points, but ultimately how your strengths will benefit them. So again, whatever you say about yourself, it really ought to relate to a strength based on what the job description or what your research in the company has identified to you as an important quality. So name 2 or 3 strengths that pertain to the job you're interviewing for, and not necessarily for all 3, maybe one quick star story to demonstrate how you have used that strength to benefit a previous employer. Again, these success stories are very, very important. What are your weaknesses is another question a lot of people dread, and you can't escape it. When they ask you that question, they're really not no one is going to believe if you say, I have no weaknesses. That's going to be a red flag. They want to, however, recognize that you are aware of weaknesses and perhaps what you're doing about them so that those weaknesses won't really impact them in a negative way. But they also can indicate your willingness to learn, grow, and improve over time. So when you're, pick out a weakness that you actually have, share, but talk about how you have overcome that weakness, or what you were doing to overcome it, or what you learned from that weakness, or how you have compensated for that weakness, and turn that potential negative into a positive by the way you answered that weakness question. Another common question is, why did you leave your previous job? And what they want to know is, are you a professional, or are you a troublemaker that has to run from jobs a lot? And they're listening for positivity. And why did you leave your previous job? is not or should not be a signal to you to dish your previous employer. This is not the time to go negative. Frankly, during the entire interview process or job search, I would say, is not a time to be negative, but sometimes people, without realizing it, they may. And it can be something as subtle as rolling your eyes before you answer that question. Why did you leave your previous job? Roll your eyes. What does that say? That's a visual, but it communicates a very negative situation. So you have to be careful how you present yourself. Totally. You have to be professional and positive. They also are going to be wanting to listen for any problems or that you may have with your performance or that you have with other people. And if that's why you left the job, that's going to be something you really need to practice, how to overcome that problem. But you don't want to have, maybe it's hard to come up with it at the spur of the moment. That is something that you can prepare for ahead of time and anticipate. So keep your answer to that question short and sweet. Don't be negative about your previous company or colleagues. The fact that a company may have had a business decision that eliminated a department or laid off a lot of people, that's very, very common. Happens all the time. And that if that's the situation that happened to you, you can just say that. It was a business decision that impacted myself and most of my department. Now, that may be all you need to say. I would suggest, and I coach my clients, immediately bring the conversation around to what you're excited about in the future. Now I'm excited about this opportunity to start the next phase of my career, and I'm very excited about this opportunity we're interviewing here for today. So that's a good way to respond to that, why did you leave your previous job kind of a question. Okay, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? Again, another very common question. What are they looking for? Well, they want to find out if you plan to be there. Will you be working with them? Will you be loyal and adaptable to whatever situations that this job, if they hire you, will present, and will you still be around in the period of time? And will you be growing with the organization? So this is where you can say, well, I hope to be successful and a contributor to this company in whatever role that works out best for me. But right now, I hope that I can demonstrate to you that I'm the quality candidate that you're looking for. Something like that. And again, I can't tell you the exact words, but make the point that you want to be with them and be loyal to their organization, adaptable to whatever changes they may find. Focus on what appeals to you about them and their company, not just about the role, and then let them know that you're willing to be adaptable to whatever their needs are, and change is going to be a constant that everybody has to deal with. Now, why should I hire you? This may be one of those overriding questions, but it is a question that you will often hear. What they wanting to know is do you really want this job, or are you just settling for any job? And if that's the case and you communicate that, then you're really not standing out as you in their eyes as you should. So when they ask you this question, express your excitement about them and this company and this position, but show them that you are eager to do this job and you think that it's a good fit for who you are. Now, you can say those words, but if you haven't done the research to back it up and why, that it may be hard for them to believe you. So again, you need to have been prepared for that. Now, salary, big challenge. Questions, what kind of salary are you looking for? Or what is your salary expectations? Or what were you paid in your previous? These are all questions that relate to salary, and we want to take a few moments to explain how to handle that. The interviewer really wants to find out whether they can afford you, whether your expectations for what you want to be paid for is in line with what they are willing to pay. And you can do some research to kind of bring that information to your attention. You can do research on salary, and there's a number of websites that you may want to go to kind of find out what the going rate is. It's rare that you'll find a job posting that actually puts the salary per hour or per month or per year, whatever the salary is rare. It does happen, but it's rare that the company is going to show their cards on the job posting as to what they're going to pay. Usually if they do that, there's very little negotiating room around that. However, most jobs are going to have the salary issue be something that you can play with and they can play with, and therefore you need to be prepared for this. So do some research ahead of time. Here's a couple of websites that you can go to do research on salary. Now, PayScale, Salary.com are both sites that draw from salary surveys that are done by all kinds of organizations. The Department of Labor does it, professional associations do it, competitors do it, Wall Street firms do it. All kinds of salary surveys go out all the time, and the results of those salary surveys is then made available to the public through PayScale and Salary. They're generic. They're geographic. You can ask for a job title in a certain zip code and get a pretty good range of what the salary is being paid in that zip code for that job title. However, the specifics of that job title might be day and night different from the specifics of the same job title in a different company. So you don't know exactly, but it does give you a kind of an eye into what they're paying, and it doesn't give you just a dollar amount. It gives you a range, a low, medium, high, based on whatever the salaries that were reported. Now, those Salary.com and PayScale.com draw from public salary surveys. Glassdoor.com is a slightly different animal. And if you're not familiar with Glassdoor, I would really encourage you to get familiar with it. It's a website where people who have worked at companies can give testimonials about what it was like to work there. They can tell you what they were paid. This is first-person information, not salary survey, but immediate first-person information. They can also tell you what the interview process was like and what kinds of questions were asked and how long it took and what some of the things to be aware of. So Glassdoor is a marvelous site for people who are in a job transition. One thing I would suggest, though, be aware. Sometimes Glassdoor can look a little more negative than what it really is, because the people are free to chew their sour grapes about a previous employer, and sometimes that does happen. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, some of the things that are on there. However, salary information on Glassdoor could be more exact to the company and to a position than what you might find on PayScale or Salary.com. So anyway, so do your research ahead of time so that you know. Also, there are also some salary calculators built in many of the big job boards like CareerBuilder, Monster, Indeed. So there are other places where you can do some salary research. Here's an overriding suggestion, however, in your prep. You want to anticipate this salary question. You want to have done some homework to prepare you to respond, but you want them to talk about money first, to state a figure first. So our suggestion about how to respond to that, what kind of salary are you looking for, is that you want to get them to commit first. And there's all kinds of ways of doing that, but resist the temptation simply to blurt out your salary expectations or to blurt out your previous salary history too soon. Now, you may have to do that, but you may want to do this first. You may want to say something like, well, what's most important to me is to work for this company. So can you tell me, now that you brought up salary, can you tell me what the salary range that you're prepared to pay is? See, that may sound a little aggressive to you. It's not. It's an assertive, professional technique. And I would be very surprised if the interviewer hadn't heard it before from someone else. Another way to approach that is say, well, I'm seeing that in my research for this type of firm and this type of position, the salary range has been from X to Y. Is that in line with what you have budgeted for this job? Now, when you ask those questions, it's critical that you stop talking and you let them answer, and then you respond to what they've said. But this is how you can avoid being the first person, perhaps, to say what your salary range is. It may not work. They may say, you know what, I can't really tell you that. You have to tell me what your expectations are before we can go any further. Well, if they draw the line in the sand like that, then you have to respond. If you do have to answer that number question and they pin you down and force you to, talk in generalities. Don't say I must have an exact amount. Talk about a range. And that range also should be in line with whatever your research has suggested is the going rate for that kind of position in that general geographic area. You may also be able to do research on salaries by talking to someone who has been in that job or who has worked in that or does work in that company. And there may be ways to do more in-depth research. But if they pin you down, you need to know what your salary range that you're expecting is. It needs to be in line with the going rate, but you don't want it to be too low, or else they may think you're undervalued. But of course, you don't want it to be too high. They may not think that you're worth it. So it's really a kind of a difficult situation to be in, but doing your research and then trying to sidestep or to deflect the answer of money first is what we recommend, and that's something that you probably ought to practice and maybe work closely with your consultant to get comfortable with that technique. We do have a webinar on negotiating job offers. This can help you with that whole issue of salary, but it's specifically designed for once you get a job offer and how to negotiate the best offer. Many people don't know how to do that or think that they can't do that, but they can. Another question is, and often this is the last question that you'll hear, what questions do you have for me? And this is something you should have prepared for. They ask that, though, just to see if you've done your homework. Again, that helps them answer that overriding question, does this person really want to work for this job? Do they want to work for us? Well, if you've done your homework, if you've researched, if you've learned something about the company, and you can reflect that by asking a question related to something that came up in your research, then you've gone a long way of answering that question effectively. They also want to find out, though, if you just have thoughtful, impressive questions to ask. Questions about doing the job. Be careful. This is not the time, this first interview or the first phase of the interview, this is not the time for you to find out about what you will enjoy if you get the job. You do not want to ask in this early stage of the interview process, you do not want to ask self-serving questions. You don't want to ask about your vacation. You don't want to ask about your benefits package. You don't want to ask whether you can bring your dog to work. What's the dress code? Will I get covered park? You don't want to ask me, self-centered questions until they make you an offer. And once they make you an offer, then the relationship has changed. Now you are the one, and it's okay. You've done a good job of selling yourself, so now you can make sure that the offer meets your needs. However, before the job offer, you were in a sales mode. You're still selling yourself to this company, to this opportunity. And you can do that with the questions you ask when you're given an opportunity in the interview. So, be prepared. Do your research, and every time you do any research, look for something related to the day-to-day or to the overriding future of that company that you can inquire about. And it says that you are thoughtful and that you're serious. Now, we have an example of some of those here. Again, this is not a complete list. Please don't take it as that. But these questions are good, safe questions to have ready to go. And frankly, you can anticipate questions that you want to ask, write them down, and carry them with you. Now, I said earlier, don't take your answers written down and read from them, but it's okay to have your questions that you want to ask written down ahead of time. That shows your preparedness. And when it comes time when they ask you this question, it comes time for you to pose these questions, you can refer to those questions, make sure you don't miss anything, or maybe mark them off, and perhaps during the interview some of the questions you had anticipated asking have already been answered. You don't want to ask those questions again, obviously. So having them written down is an okay thing. But here, look at these questions. What are the next steps in the hiring process that I should be aware of, and when do you expect to make a hiring decision? Well, that's a good question to ask. That lets you, because that helps you prepare to what your follow-up is going to be. Asking them about their favorite thing working there. Any reason I can elaborate on to and reinforce that I am the right person for this position. How would you describe the ideal candidate? What distinguishes an average performer from a top performer or in this role or company? You can ask about expectations within the first 6 months. What are the expectations of the person who gets this job for the first 6 months? What kind of training program or orientation do you have planned for the successful candidate? So all of these questions are related to doing the job. That's the key. Ask questions related to doing the job, not questions about what you're going to enjoy from the job. Always ask questions. It demonstrates confidence, thoughtfulness, and a genuine interest in doing that, working for that company. Okay, some special tips now about your interview. Have these questions prepared ahead of time. Jot them down, plan for them. Write them down in a folder with a working pen and bring that folder along with you. Inside that folder, you also can probably have a few copies of your resume carefully printed out on good, hard, heavy-duty paper, as well as a list of references. But again, don't offer these unless they're asked for, but having them in your folder makes you appear to be prepared. You probably you may want to, especially if you're doing a lot of networking during your job search, have a set of business cards of your own that indicate, your own phone number and your email and your personal contact, your LinkedIn address and all that. And you can get that from a office supply store, Office Depot, Staples, FedEx office. There's all kinds of places or Vistaprint.com. Vistaprint.com is a website that has lots of templates for business cards that you can fill out and order. They're not very expensive, but they're a great tool to have for a job search. Now, so all of that's about the interview. How about the follow-up? And then we'll be done here in a moment. Well, your follow-up, you should have a couple of things on your to-do list for a follow-up. You should be prepared to write a thank you note, and it could be a written note or an email. But again, my point of view is the more effort you put into it, the more positive impact that note will have when it's received. But anyway, it needs to be sent quickly within 24 hours. Now, that's partly because they're going to be interviewing other candidates, and within 24 hours, your presentation or your memory may be faded in their mind. A follow-up note, a thank you note, an email from you to them that relates to the interview or key points that you said about yourself or something you talked about during the interview, that can bring you back clear in their memory after a period of time, and that's always a good thing to do. You need to also be ready, not immediately, but after the time frame they have indicated that they needed to make a decision. When you ask about next steps, whatever that time frame they tell you is, you want to honor that. But after that time frame is up, if you've not heard from anybody, it's okay to make a follow-up phone call to just see if there's anything else that you can do to help make accelerate the decision process. And if you have been referred to a job by a recruiter or someone in your network that told you about the interview or set it up for you, your follow-up should involve following up with them, letting them know how the interview went, what you thought you did well, what you thought you may have done poorly, how you could do better next time, whatever. But follow up with whoever has helped you to secure that interview. Now, there's a lot more that we can go into about following up, and as a matter of fact, we've prepared a webinar called Following Up After the Interview that goes into more detail about that. But one of the most important things about the follow-up is your mental state, your point of view about the interview and about your chances. We suggest that your mental state regarding your entire job search can be either one of your greatest assets or it can be one of your biggest hurdles. How you think about, how you anticipate, what you expect, what you do to yourself, the self-talk that you give yourself before, during, and after an interview, that's very, very important for a successful job search. And you can control that, but you should be positive. You should be optimistic. So be optimistic about your chances. Don't think, oh, they'll never call me. I just blew it. That's the wrong kind of attitude. After careful interview preparation, if you've done your job right, and you didn't really just blow it during the interview, odds are in your favor that you have a good chance. Consider this. They would not have called you in for an interview if they did not think you had, something to offer. They would not have wasted their time. So they saw your resume and qualifications. You were among a small percentage of people who actually got invited to an interview process. That means that you have, the possibilities are in your favor. And understand this, the interviewer, the company, does not want to have to keep on interviewing people. That's an expensive thing to do. It's also a dangerous thing to do. Not only dangerous from potentially hiring the wrong person, but also dangerous from if the interviewer makes a mistake in some way that could be considered unfair to the candidates, that could be the beginning of a lawsuit. That happens all the time. Companies, it's not an easy thing for them to do. They do not want to continue to interview. They are hoping you are the one. So if you can have that attitude going into an interview, then that might help you in overall in your perspective of things. Now, once the interview is over, don't stop your job search activities. Don't sit by the phone waiting for it to ring. That was not a good technique back when you were single and dating. That's probably not a good technique when you're interviewing on the job search field. So keep your active job search up. And then if, in fact, they tell you that they hired someone else, or if, in fact, and unfortunately a lot of companies don't tell you they hired somebody else, you just don't hear anything until you follow up, and then they let you know the position's been filled by somebody else. Well, that will happen. However, how you react to that mentally has a lot to do with your success. If you are not offered the job, do not take it personally. a way of thinking about it is, well, there's a better job out there waiting for me. Another way of looking at it is, well, they picked a good person, but that person may not really work out, or they may not really take the job, and I want to make sure that I don't burn any bridges. So I want to make sure that the person I interviewed with keeps me in mind, because there may be another job within the company, or this position I interviewed for may come available again in the near future. And I want them to keep thinking of me, because this is the company I want to work for. So you can craft that kind of, as a matter of fact, if you tend to follow up after the interview, I think it's in the, we have another, we have lots of webinars. A webinar on cover letter and other letters. One of the follow-up letters that you can write after receiving a rejection is the hold the door open, or keep me in mind, or I want to be considered for future opportunities letter. Well, that is another possibility of how you can react to a disappointing decision that they hired someone else. But again, your attitude about how you deal with that can go a long way towards your success. All right, so we're at the end. Just to recycle some of the key points here, 3 phases to an interview: what you do before, during, and then what you do after. There are a variety of different kinds of interviews. Interviewers are looking for clues from you, and they get that from what they see, as well as how you sound and the words that you use. Behavioral questions are very common, and success stories from your past are the best way to answer those, and you can anticipate and prepare ahead of time for a lot of those. You will also hear one of, if not all of, those basic interview questions, although we can't really give you a complete list, but that's a pretty good list that you can help to prepare for. Have your salary research prepared ahead of time, and have how you would respond to that initial salary question ready to go. Have good questions ready to ask of the interviewer, and then always send you a thank you note at the end. And again, we do have that following up after the interview webinar for you to take. Okay, because this is a recording, I really don't have opportunities for you to answer any of the questions that you have. However, if you have questions about interviewing, please feel free to reach out to your consultant and engage him or her in a conversation about how to prepare, and it's any of the things we've presented in this webinar. That is our webinar for today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been my pleasure to be your host. Again, my name is Brian Allen, and Career Management Partners is the organization that is helping you in your job search. So take advantage of all of our resources, our Career Workspace website, the consultant that's been assigned to you, all the resources that you can find in the library, these webinars. You're not alone in this job search, and it's been my pleasure to help you out in this particular opportunity to learn about interviewing successfully. That's our webinar for today, ladies and gentlemen. Best of luck in your job search. Best of luck in preparing for your successful interview, and I hope to see you at another webinar soon. Thank you, and goodbye.